Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as the coffee service professional. My name is Chris DiFirio. I'm your host for the show. And thank you again, or thank you for the first time in this episode, as it were, for joining me on the show. I really appreciate it. And if you're a first-time listener, welcome. I really appreciate you tuning in. And I would say best thing for you to do, or if you're a long-time listener and you haven't done this yet, subscribe to the show, and you will be updated when new episodes come out. We just recently, for example, relaunched our Rate of Rise series, being sponsored by Mill City Coffee Roasters, and we are excited about that one. But we produce probably about 9, sometimes even up to 10 episodes per month, so get tuned in and get subscribed. Also on YouTube, you can subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Good idea to hit the notification bell, thumbs up, and all that fun stuff. Now, one thing that I'm really wanting you to hear about here is all through the month of February, we are accepting applications for key holder coaching groups. These are support groups for coffee shop owners. We meet over the course of 6 months. Every meeting is 2 hours. Each time we meet, 2 members get to share what's going on in their coffee shop or in their own mind, or what's happening with their business, to let us help them, to have the group speak to the issues that they might be having, whether that's with staffing or systems or finances. And we've covered so many different things as we've done this now for 3 seasons. It started in 2023. We've had many groups now, and we're getting ready to launch the 4th season, the 4th run of this in March. And I'd love to have you fill out an application to be considered for membership in these groups. They're hosted by myself. I really have been encouraged to see the kind of growth and value delivered in these key holder coaching groups. And so if you're interested, you can do one of a few things, I suppose. You can go to the show notes and click on the link. It'll take you right to the application. You can fill that out, and you and I will have a conversation just over Zoom, just talking about what's going on and, your story, basically, about your business. And then the other way is just to reach out directly, and I'll send you the application, and we can have that conversation. It's chris@keystotheshop.com. And this is something I think you should really consider. If you've heard about it over the course of the last year or so, and you are interested but haven't really pulled the trigger quite yet, this might be the time to do it in 2025. So reach out, chris@keystotheshop.com, about key holder coaching groups, or just one-on-one coaching or consulting if you want to reach out about that. Same email. So today, our episode is sponsored by the wonderful folks over at Arto Brick, at Arto Brick on Instagram, and also the Pacific Barista series, the plant-based beverage that is like the foundational plant-based beverage for the specialty coffee community. We're going to talk more about both of those folks later in the episode. But for right now, I would like to get you familiarized with today's guest in today's episode. We're talking today with Tim Williams, who is the director of the World AeroPress Championship and the founder of Melbourne's Fieldwork Coffee. And Tim is one of these folks that's been around the industry for forever. But he has worked across a range of roles, including Workshop Coffee and Square Mile Coffee Roasters in London, and Intelligentsia Coffee and Tea in Los Angeles, to name a few. And on the sidelines, Tim is collaborated on a number of different coffee initiatives, including helping develop Maison's Cafe Kitsune. So Maison Kitsune's Cafe Kitsune, launching the Gitesi project. And as a founder of the Coffee Common project, I don't know if anyone was around the industry long enough in the listening audience to know about that, but that was something that was in conjunction with TED Talks. It was a super cool project, and Tim was one of the founding members of Coffee Common. And so today, Tim lives in Melbourne and divides his time between Fieldwork Coffee and the World AeroPress Championships. And he runs a small charity in rural Rwanda, on top of raising 3 kids with his partner, Leah. I mean, Tim is basically a man of the coffee world, let's say. And so it's really a pleasure to get to have Tim on the show to get a little bit of a retrospective on his career and how his philosophy of coffee has developed. Because here's the thing, if you've listened for a while, you know people's stories often reflect our stories and are kind of a good timeline, an indicator of what was happening in the industry in those early days. All the projects that Tim has been a part of, you're going to hear stories about the small team at Square Mile Coffee Roasters and sealing bags and delivering coffee. You're going to hear about different projects that he's involved with, like the AeroPress Championships and everything in between, and how his philosophy on coffee, this is pivotal. And I thought it was a great way that he put this, went from conquering coffee to celebrating coffee. And I love that idea because that's something that I think is in the air right now. We've developed over the course of these many decades a certain maturity about the way we approach coffee. And I think Tim kind of embodies this philosophy on top of our discussion around specialization and pursuing excellence within our certain little niches, our specializations. And so we're going to get an inside story on kind of the coffee industry timeline, some philosophy that Tim has developed along the way. And he gives us some great lessons on accessibility, celebration, excellence, and specializing in focused areas of coffee, and much more. So, of course, we get to hear a little bit about what all the AeroPress is about, the AeroPress Championships, and how that competition in particular is special in how it helps celebrate and focus our attention on the basic fundamentals of coffee. So let's get right to it. I've talked enough. Of course, I want you to hear from Tim. So here now is my conversation with Tim Williams of the World AeroPress Championships. Well, Tim, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are things over there?
Things are good. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be able to connect and have a chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I was kind of joking with you a little bit ago as we were talking about recording this. I have known your avatar for quite a long time in coffee. What was the handle was like Tim Styles or something like that, and
That's right.
never had the pleasure of meeting you. And as we chatted about our conversation, I just got more excited about kind of exploring your career and your perspectives on coffee that you've developed over these decades now of coffee. And that's nice to say that, isn't it? Decades of coffee.
It is. I'm very comfortable with having a couple of decades of coffee experience under my belt.
It's wisdom. It's just, yeah, I am as well. So I want to just kind of open it up the way we would any kind of story, but really just thinking about how Tim decided that, coffee was a profession instead of an obsession, where it kind of shifted because a lot of people drink coffee growing up or exposed to the concept, but goes down deep at some point and it just kind of stays there. What was that moment for you?
It certainly wasn't a decision in the moment. There was definitely no day where I arrived at the conclusion that, look, on a risk-adjusted basis, this industry makes the most
Yeah.
sense and we'll have the greatest dollar reward and as a result I'm going to pursue it as a career. It definitely did not come about like that. Like most people, I got into coffee through drinking coffee. I know there's exceptions to that rule, but for me, I enjoyed the drinking of coffee, and I always liked being hands-on with things and working in whether it's jobs or projects that were interesting and challenging. And if nothing else, the coffee industry is both interesting and in great measures challenging. So also like a lot of people, my first professional foray into coffee was as a barista. I needed some money in my pocket while I was at university, and there was a coffee maker job going at a market here in Melbourne. And it struck me that that sounded really easy. It sounded kind of fun. I figured I'd had done a 2 hour espresso course. So I figured I, probably knew about as much as I needed to know about coffee. And so I applied for the job. I slept through the interview. I woke up, an hour and a half after the interview was supposed to happen and called the guy and said, I slept through, like, is there any point in me even coming down? And he said, not really, but, if you can get here by 11, we can have a chat. He must have been in quite a desperate place when it came to employment because he gave me the job anyway. And
Wow.
I ended up working there for several years. And he's still someone who I go to for advice and, yeah, we're still in contact pretty frequently. So that was how I sort of like ended up standing in front of a coffee machine in exchange for cash at the end of the week, and that's where it really started. But
Yeah.
that role was not they cared a lot about quality, but it was quality in that really like traditional Italian sense of quality. Making sure the espresso is really short and just all you're doing is adjusting the grinder and getting out, 7, 8, 900 cups of coffee a day. That was the approach. But for me, that was a really great foundational, place to launch from and to learn a lot of skills and a lot of organizational and operational skills. So
Yeah.
that was the inception point. And it wasn't really until quite a bit later where I kind of realized that this was more career than just like one project to the next to the next. I would say that the real like fulcrum for that was relocating to London in 2006 from my home in Melbourne, which was on a bit of a jaunt. It wasn't specifically in order to follow a coffee career or launch a coffee career, but it was situation where I was luckier more than I was smart. But I landed in London in 2006 and was working as a barista right when sort of the London scene exploded and took off. I was there for 10 years and London went from 3 shops that you would call like the kind of coffee shop that Chris, you would be happy to go to. In
Yeah.
2006, there were only 3 of them, right? There was Flat White, there was Clemson and Sons, and there was Monmouth Coffee, who'd been there
Right.
since 1978. And that was it. By the time I left 10 years later, there were 330 independent coffee shops in London alone. And I just happened to be there at that time and managed to ride that wave. And so it was there that, it sort of started to dawn on me that this is probably more a career than just the current thing that I'm enjoying doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Your initial comment about getting your hands in the work, and we'll talk about Fieldwork, your business, your roasting company later. But it struck me that if you're making all of these coffees in such a rapid succession in this old school Italian atmosphere, and you're just kind of pushing out the coffee, but it feels like you must have been there must have been a groundwork laid in you, like deep inside of you, that just you started to notice and was affirmed by getting exposure to this bigger industry, that it almost feels like there must have been this point of resonance where all the stuff that you had embodied as a barista in your work as an individual, maybe a little isolated even, getting exposed to that kind of that third wave movement even outside of your own hometown, must have been a lot of confirmation and affirmation of things that you had spent your time doing.
Perhaps like by happenstance, but again, certainly not by design.
Yeah.
I think it's always been like a personality trait for me to do things kind of 100% or not at all. And, that stands you in pretty good stead if you arrive in London and there's this like open sea of like coffee opportunity and roasteries starting up and people wanting to do things. There's so much opportunity. And if you're the kind of person who goes in 110% on everything, those opportunities tend to fall to you. You're in the right place at the right time. So I think it's, yeah, that having that, it's not always a personality positive. It can definitely be a negative as well. But being the kind of person who tends to like to do things like pretty thoroughly, that definitely opened up a lot of those opportunities. And I was sort of shedding hobbies by that time as well. Like all the other things that I did in my life just fell by the wayside, and really work and working in coffee specifically became the entire pie for
Yeah.
for better or worse. Music, recreation, holidays, anything else really really just
Did.
evaporated very much so. Yeah, and it just became pretty all consuming. Yeah. But
Hmm.
I think coffee is like uniquely well suited to that kind of thing because there are so many different facets that you can turn your attention to. Like you can have a web design agency that only services coffee clients, and you can be a coffee industry web designer, or you could be a
Yeah.
finance person that only advises coffee companies, or you could be a green buyer, you can be a barista. Like there's no limit really in under the umbrella of coffee to what you can turn your attention to. So for me, I found that like really exciting and freeing. And when I looked at coffee, I didn't really see sitting at a desk doing the same thing until retirement. There's this like never-ending plethora of different activities and roles and responsibilities that you know could fall to you under this one umbrella, which is exciting. Especially as somebody in your early 20s in the middle of London. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was sort of how it roughly started to come about.
When you went into that scenario and saw the culture of coffee in that context, what was it that struck you that was really different about what was happening in that moment in coffee? And what lessons did you learn as you participated in the unfolding of that movement?
The enthusiasm in London at that time, or I should say the UK in general, but my primary focus was on London. The enthusiasm was fantastic. So I'd say like enthusiasm and camaraderie as well. Every coffee shop and roaster was really keen and willing to help each other and learn together. Tasting events were routinely held at Square Mile, where I was working at the time, and they were great community builders, and people were getting to know each other and learning about coffee. And that energy really launched so much of what is the London coffee scene today. We also had three World Barista Champions in pretty rapid succession
Yeah.
too, which brought a lot of focus to the city and brought a lot of interest. And I think all of that, like enthusiasm, camaraderie, attention, really just like helped the London coffee scene develop very quickly. And I think back home in Melbourne, when I, on the very rare occasion in that 10-year period, would come back to Melbourne, Melbourne was just doing its thing. It was a little bit like, yeah, we have good coffee. Like a little bit of that laconic, chilled Australian vibe that I just don't have at all.
Oh, okay.
Uh, yeah, no, it was just like, yeah, it's cool. Yeah, coffee's good. It was good yesterday. It'll be good tomorrow. So it was a lot more exciting and fun and freeing, I think, to be working in London and able to get our hands dirty, able to start a roastery, able to be buying great green coffee, seeing how it responded in the roaster, and then sharing it with a much bigger population than we could in Australia. So
When you say get your hands dirty, do you mean do new things, explore new things?
yeah, definitely explore new things, but not in a theoretical kind of way. It was literally we were literally doing the work. It was the roasteries all started pretty small. I started at Square Mile when there were only three employees, two of which were the founders, and I started there because I was just hanging out and sweeping the floor because that bit of floor needed sweeping, and stick a few labels on some bags, and oh yeah, I can seal them. And it was through sort of being really hands on and involved. It wasn't a case of sitting back and saying, what's the theory here? How is this going to develop? It was
Hmm.
literally Annette Moldever, who you probably know as one of the founders of Square Mile
Yes.
Roasting, James Hoffman printing out the packing slips, and me sealing bags and you know putting them into envelopes to card up to the post office. Like it was super hands on, and that again I think is like really crucial foundational involvement. You know, it's also exciting and it's fun, and that I think breeds an energy
Hmm.
that then translates to coffee shops, that then translates to different events, it translates to the competition scene as well. All of that comes together to make what is like a city's coffee community or a city's coffee culture. And, that was the part that I felt very fortunate to have been a part of.
You're exposing a lot of coffee drinkers to new ways of perceiving coffee in that movement. And you mentioned competitions that happens to coincide with the explosion of all of these. I think it was, what was it, Monte Carlo in 2000 was the first World Barista
Yeah.
Championships, technically. And there, very conveniently, this is when we also see the rise of this enthusiasm. So it not as a result necessarily only because of that, but it certainly didn't hurt because it's literally a stage to present enthusiasm. I mean, how much of a role did this play in just opening up doors of conversation about coffee to the people that would become the clients, the wholesale clients, or just the regular coffee drinking clients of these newer coffee brands?
I think that it had a significant impact. I think it had an impact on customers, but probably quite a fleeting impact. More of a like, oh, that's a bit weird. That's kind of cool. It sounds a bit like a dog show for coffee makers, but that
Yes.
you do you. Thanks for the coffee. I think for baristas and people working in coffee, I think it felt quite validating because up until that point, you weren't a barista, you were a uni dropout, or
Yeah.
you were someone who you were transitioning between education and then what are you going to do with the rest of your life. But coffee was not an acceptable answer at that point. So then the idea of like, well, there's a world championship for this, and there's this guy, and he did this thing with this milk, and it did this thing, and
Yeah.
it was on a big stage, and now there's a documentary about his journey, and all those kind of things. I think are validating as a barista. Chances are, we probably lent on that a little bit too hard and a little bit too enthusiastically, maybe overstating the importance of the of being a world barista champion just a little bit. But I do think it added a lot to the narrative that you're able to tell yourself as a barista about your life choices and where you're putting your energy. That it is recognized and appreciated and elevated on a bigger scale. It's not just all right. It's 2:30 p.m. Time to empty out the knock tube and wash the mats before we do it all over again. So yeah, I think it validated the barista experience more so than the customer one.
Let me ask about this idea of enthusiasm and how it might turn into hubris and alienation, where in our enthusiasm, we start to create a lot more doors than on ramps, and so to speak, whatever we want to use as an analogy there. But it does seem like you're hinting at that idea of having people elevate this particular role more than is helpful. It felt like maybe there was some of that in coffee itself. Just we maybe engaged in a lot of that, but did you see that develop? And how did you feel when you saw that? I mean, I know today you have a really nuanced view of coffee and the industry, but at the time when all that enthusiasm was just fresh, I mean, it is a force that is just pulling you along.
Yeah. I not only saw it happen, like I was guilty as charged, of being a driving force of like this really confident absolutism about coffee and, backed up by the worst kind of pseudoscience and, all these things that happen in a like an emerging space, especially when that space is largely guarded by young men in their early, 20s. God forbid there should be, facts or nuance or reason brought into play in any of
Right.
it. But no, I was 100% one of those people saying, oh, we need to close the front door because the gust of wind changed the grinder, and it's like we can't pull
Yeah.
shots in those conditions, and you know, all these things, like assuming that the coffee itself, the physical product sitting in this hopper going through these grinders is this like completely neutral, standardized commodity. None of which was true. We were grabbing little things we'd read on Twitter or even, I mean, blogs at that point and taking them as gospel and not fact checking anything and regurgitating this stuff to customers, whether they cared or not. They got the spiel. I was definitely a part of that and guilty of that. And it happens, like, to say I regret it is like, whatever. But being able to then, get to a point in an understanding of coffee where you really can appreciate that this product is like hugely agricultural. Like it is huge, like the experience of a seedling growing in soil to a cup of coffee on a bench in Melbourne, Australia is like how many millions of miracles need to occur for that transaction to happen,
Yeah.
let alone how many different directions can that taste profile end up, taking from very small changes. And I think it was really, going to a coffee farm for the first time when I went to Kenya. Kenya was the first coffee trip that I ever did, and seeing coffee trees growing. I won't say in the wild. They're cultivated crops in Kenya, but coffee trees growing on a smallholder plot, and just seeing not only is not every coffee farm the same, the coffee tree, not only are the trees not the same, the different branches are not the same. The
Yeah.
individual cherries growing in clusters are wildly different from each other. There's black ones that are overripe that are about to drop off. There's green ones that, taste like bell pepper. And then there's a couple of very sweet ripe cherries in the middle. Like we had these like black and white absolutist statements about coffee, and this is this, and this is happening because X, Y, and Z, because you ran that shot for 31 seconds instead of 30 seconds. That's why it tasted bad. And then you're like,
Yeah.
this product is so varied, so nuanced, so agricultural, so susceptible to influence and input. You go to a dry mill and you see, I don't know for sure if the coffee in your shot of espresso came from the bags at the very top of the stack, in the scorching hot tin shed dry mill, or the really nicely insulated coffee bags at the bottom of the stack, where they're not susceptible to temperature fluctuations, and there is so much that can change just from the tree to the port, let alone everything that happens after that. So
Yeah.
I think once you can kind of grasp a little more readily the scale of the chain and all the different things that can happen in that chain to affect the cup, then you really start to dial back your absolutism, and you can start to appreciate the nuance in coffee and work with the nuance of coffee as opposed to
Mm.
trying to conquer it and defeat coffee. Like coffee is not something to be solved. Like coffee is a living agricultural taste-based experience that you have to work with and not try and conquer. Once you can make that switch and appreciate it, you'll actually unlock so much more quality. It's actually so much more enjoyable. There's so much less frustration, and it doesn't mean that your coffee's worse. You're able to work with the coffee in a completely different way. And I think, the results for roasters that work like that, I mean, they're the roasters that I want to buy from. They're the kind of coffees that I want to drink. So I think nuance is completely crucial to the whole like experience of excellence as well.
Well, I'm curious. I want to get a little deeper there because, as a roaster yourself, and someone who is, actively running this business and so much experience, the philosophy you bring, you're talking about conquering versus, celebrating these nuances and working with it. At the same time, there's always this desire to create consistency in some level or have excellence, defined however we want to define it, I suppose, but we are pursuing something good from what we're doing. What is it that a roaster is doing differently when they're pursuing not the conquering of coffee, but the working with coffee that makes you want to buy their coffee more?
There seem to be loads of roasters that don't cup consistently, and I know it seems like
Uh,
a yeah, it seems like a super obvious thing, but you have to be cupping constantly, and you have to be
mhm.
cupping your own coffee really critically. And when I ran workshop coffee back in London, with the team that I worked with there, the edict that we had for ourselves was that, we should always be our own harshest critics. Like nobody should be giving us feedback about our coffee that we weren't already aware of. And part of that was being able to stand around that coffee with the three or four people that I worked with and cup coffee and say, this isn't great. It's good. It's not great. We need to be able to take this to the next step. How are we going to do that? What's our approach going to be? And, we see it pretty consistently, that there's roasters who, easier not to have that difficult conversation with the person who roasted it or whose, name is on the crops to tag. We'll just let it go. Most customers won't really care. And that's a bit of a self-perpetuating cycle as well that I think roasters get into. So, on the flip side, like we're making sure that we're cupping obviously every production batch that we roast, and in a really critical way and in a really open way. That's really only handling the roast quality questions. The way that we buy coffee, the importance there is in having that really critical evaluation too. So, multi-stage selection. We never cup something and then just buy it instantly. Everything needs to go through multi-stage cupping, and probably 8 times out of 10 we're cupping from we're buying from a producer we've bought from in the past. So we have a couple of years reference to compare with. They're all the tactics. They're all the day-to-day mechanics, the bits and pieces, but the main overarching sort of idea there needs to be that you're committed to a particular thing. And for us, that's, really fresh, in-season, washed processed coffees, clean, elegant. Like that's what we're there to do. And then we have that framework that is baked into our entire approach. And that's the metric that we can compare every buying decision against, every production batch against, every pot of batch brew coffee that we prepare in one of the stores.
Yeah.
That's our North Star. And that's what we can always keep nudging our coffee back towards the whole time.
Well, hey, everybody, it's Chris, and we'll be right back to our episode with Tim Williams. But first, I want to talk to you about Arto Brick. Arto Brick on Instagram is just at Arto Brick. At Arto Brick, they provide you with stonework, hard surfaces, and tiles made in Los Angeles, California, and especially designed to make your space special. their philosophy on things is very much a focus and intentionality on creating unique and meaningful spaces. And of course, that includes coffee shops. So Armin would love nothing more than to talk to you. And to do that, you just follow them on Instagram at ArtoBrick, and then reach out and DM Armin. You can say hello, say Chris sent you from Keys to the Shop. If you're looking to open a new cafe and start your first cafe, but want the texture and the feel of it to be something very special, think about the tile, the stonework, and hard surfaces through Arto Brick at arto.com. All right, so today also we're sponsored by the folks at the Pacific Barista Series. The Barista Series is a line of plant-based performance beverages that is designed for baristas. It's designed so that people who are fussy about their coffee can feel at peace, knowing that they're serving excellent things to their customers. It stands up to the heat from steaming, has great texture for latte art. It also creates balance in the cup, so the flavor is never off in one direction, but it's always making coffee the star. So go to pacificfoodservice.com, check them out, get samples, try it for yourself, and I think you're really going to love the Pacific Barista Series and should consider it when you're thinking about the best plant-based beverage to serve your customers. So let's get right back to our conversation with Tim Williams. So you have a framework, you have a goal, and there's so many roasters out there that you can have a roaster that fills. Somebody else is all about naturals. Somebody else is all about, these days, the co-fermentation and other types of yeast inoculate, whatever it is. But that framework is there for you to use as like a platform to showcase the nuances within it. Because you are a business, after all, that you can't do everything. Because coffee, as you stated before, it's so big, and you can't do everything on the menu. You kind of have to pick a lane. I'm sure that kind of helps you in your focus do better work with what you have than if you felt you needed to do everything.
So there's two reasons why we have the approach that we have. Like, one is because these are the coffees that I want to drink, and that's the really selfish driving force. Like, I want super clean, well roasted, lightly but not too light, definitely not too dark. Wash processed coffees like that. That's what I love, and so that's why we roast those kind of coffees. But having a focus means that we can put all of our energy into doing that. And, I totally agree that like you can't do everything, but man, that doesn't stop people from trying. And the amount of roasters or coffee companies, I mean, this applies to all businesses. Like we're talking about coffee, but it's a much broader, philosophy than just coffee. The amount of businesses where you say, like, so what's your approach? Like, what are you guys all about? And the answer is, oh, we, do a little bit of everything. And what I hear from that is like, we do a lot of stuff at about 30%. That's like, that's the thing.
Yeah.
And maybe that's fine because a lot of those businesses as well are priced in a way that's like, okay, so you can get, let's say, Market Lane coffee or Onyx coffee or, whoever the kind of the market leader is in your area. You can get this coffee at this price. Well, we're like 60% as good as them, but we're only 50% of the price. And that is a real approach. That's a real model here in Australia that a lot of people are chasing down. And all power to them. Like that's fine. It sounds horrible as like for me as a way to work or a thing to work on. But that's their approach. I like the opposite side of that bet. Like I prefer the other side of that coin. We want to focus. We want to get really, really good at the very few things that we do. We want our customers and our staff as well to be much, much more confident in the very few things that we're putting forward rather than having this like wide range and being like, the last bag I got from those guys was like, okay, but like maybe the next one will be better or whatever. Other people have that whole bit of the market sewn up. Like we're not really interested in that. And we're actually trying to find more and more ways that we can consolidate that focus even more. We're about 3, 4 months into one new approach that, is not new to the fashion industry and probably not new to lots of industries. There are probably lots of people who do it in coffee as well, but it's new for us in that we used to just release new coffees as and when one coffee ran out. Then we'd have another one ready, sitting there ready to go, and then we'd release that one. And we go through about like a 35 stage checklist for every new coffee release. And, that's quite a punishing workload if you're releasing 3 coffees a month, or it ends up being, 4 in the next month. So what we've chosen to do is actually start releasing all of our coffee in blocks. So basically in collections, 4 times a year, where we'll release between 4 and 5 new coffees at once. We batch all that workload together, all of the tasting notes, all of the label creation, all of the roast profile development. That all happens now in blocks that let us consolidate that work into a collection release that we then have in our range for between 10 and 14 weeks. Halfway through that collection being active, we start working on the next collection. That's allowed us to go even deeper into that kind of focus and introspection, because then we're not even just looking at each coffee individually. We're looking at how that coffee sits within the range in a much more like consolidated, focused way. But like I said, we're only a couple of months into that, and it's definitely going well so far. But we're working on we're ironing out the kinks in that approach as we go. But
Yeah.
for me, like being able to bulk all that kind of work together, put out a new collection, spend the next like 5 or 6 weeks really, really fine tuning those profiles, and then we get to work on the next collection. I think it's taken a lot of stress off the team in terms of always being on that release treadmill, and really, I think, trying to harvest and some of the good ideas, some of the better ideas from the fashion industry, and bring those
Yeah.
over to coffee.
Well, I like that you have had, this doubling down on the approach of it's not the typical mid-tier coffee experience, if you will. Although I guess there could be an argument that the specialness of an approach similar to yours is made somewhat special by the ubiquitous nature of coffee, yeah, at that level, at the mid-tier level. But you mentioned something I thought was really interesting, which is that a customer says, I really like their coffee, but this one wasn't really that great. And we kind of throw that away as a, oops, sorry, just, you're going to have to forgive us because we're local, or we're,
Mm.
this, these spunky entrepreneurs. In this day and age where hustle culture and entrepreneur culture is just so rampant, it feels like the credit that is extended to us in those ways of not fulfilling the customer's expectation is kind of running out.
I don't know. In Australia, I feel like you could ride that wave
Yeah.
a lot longer to the beach. Yeah, I think so. Like I think there's very few voices here in Australia who are genuinely critical, and I use critical in the the more technical sense of like critiquing something, and not critical as in like punishing for unjust reasons, but like there's very few voices that are actually critical of coffee, coffee quality. Coffee reviews are really more about customer service, product range, or experience.
Mm-hmm.
Never really about coffee quality, but that's, I would say, largely like the industry's own fault. I certainly couldn't blame regular coffee consumers for feeling alienated from the coffee industry, because the amount of times I've bought a bag of coffee from, let's say, upper mid tier to like well respected roasters in Australia, and you pick up the bag and it says elderflower, jasmine, and honeysuckle. and you brew that coffee, you cup that coffee, you taste that coffee, and it's like this coffee died a death a year ago in green form. It tastes like old carpets and, you know, chipboard. Like, the right thing to do is to take that bag of coffee back or to get in touch with that roaster and say, your coffee is defective. Like, A, it doesn't taste anything like it is on the label. Like, let's cup it and let's like see what you experience. But that's not what we do, and we never do that in coffee.
Yeah.
Customers don't do it, and we don't do it to each other. There is one kind of voice here in Australia who is a former cup tasters champion or brewers cup champion, I think, who does not work in the coffee industry. Who, he roasts at home on a roast machine, and he's like extremely experienced, and he calls balls and strikes with like no, I don't know what a language rating on this
Yeah.
show is, so I'll keep it clean. He doesn't care at all. He's got no skin in the game either way, so he can be really really upfront about experiences, and they're based in wisdom. He has the ability to taste in a really considered way. But we generally don't do that in the coffee industry. We generally don't call out for coffee quality.
Why not?
Because we're all just mates and we're just trying to get along, and we're not in it for the money. We're just you know it's a community. But I think it's like I think it's hugely problematic, and I think it's hugely stilting because as a young coffee professional as well, with no feedback, with no actual critical feedback from someone who you trust and someone who offers you ideas about how to improve it, one, you build no resilience. So then one day be told, dude, that coffee sucks, man. Like that's agey as anything. Like that, you shouldn't be serving that. People need to hear this, but they don't. Like, I've been the roaster told by Tim Wendelboe, a roaster who I admire greatly and who I think, sources, roasts, markets in this like exemplary way, being told like, "Oh, your coffee is really bad. Yeah, really bad. It tastes bad. Yeah, yeah, ashy, bitter finish, hollow in the middle. Like, I just think they're going, great, yeah, thanks. But that either crushes you or you go back to the drawing board and you start, you know, working on that, being like, okay, when he says ashy, he means this, and that's, when maybe we end temps are a little high, maybe charge temps are a little high, whatever. That's how you get better. But if all you're told is, oh, another triumph, Chris, just immaculate again, every time, you know, what do you work on? What do you get? What do you get stuck into?
Yeah, blowing smoke. Yeah, it's not just for roasters. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
you have that. I think you've got that nailed. And one of the things that, and I kind of want to use this to segue to your AeroPress involvement because, as a director of AeroPress and the championship, the World Championship, there is something about coffee that doesn't go away, and that is that it is taste based. Even if we don't want to admit it, because we're very reticent to do so because we don't want to offend anybody, customers buy it primarily because of the taste, not because of barista community or anything else like that. And the AeroPress, among other brewing devices, has made coffee accessible to people who do want to have a taste experience that is reliable and not fussy, no matter what the industry decides it needs to do to brand itself as relevant or whatever. So I'm curious, if you've seen that in the running of this competition with AeroPress, the confirmation that yes, this is still something that is ultimately probably the most important thing about coffee is that it tastes good and it's something that the common person can access as the main feature of coffee.
yeah. So if people aren't aware, like the way the World AeroPress Championship works is that there's no presentation. Um, the competitors don't speak. So I mean, they can speak if they want to, but it's not gonna. This, it doesn't add
Yeah.
anything to the scoring. There's no. You're not laying tablecloths or polishing crystal glassware or anything like that. All you do as a competitor in their AeroPress Championship is take the same bag of coffee that your fellow competitors have, brew the best cup of coffee you can, and you put it forward to the judges, and the judges taste it. That's the entire shooting match. The cup that tastes the best is the one that goes through. The other two, the other three are knocked out. We're going into our 17th year. I've been running the championship for about 12 years now. We've had a lot of opportunities to change the championship, to introduce new rules, do all sorts of different things. The main thing that we've kept at the center of the World AeroPress Championship is that it is an evaluation of how well you can take a bag of coffee and use the brewing variables that you understand to extract the best tasting experience out of those beans. I think that's a really valuable skill. I think that's
Yeah.
something that should be celebrated and put onto a world stage. That's not to say that the WBC doesn't do a particular thing very well, or that the Brewers Cup doesn't do a particular thing very well. They just do a different thing very well. 9 times out of 10, like the person who I want brewing the cup of coffee for me is someone who has tasted the coffee. I said, okay, it's a little fresh. We're going to like fine the grind, longer bloom, do this, whatever, because I think that'll nudge it to being slightly, what I think is like more delicious, and having the courage of their convictions to squeak the recipe within those parameters and put that cup of coffee forward. That I think is surprisingly a hugely underrated skill. We wanted to make that, like I said, the entire shooting match of the AeroPress Championship. We've had, lots of people try and encourage us to nudge the championship in different directions through sponsorships and through different, generally through different like financial mechanisms. We'd like to be able to bring our own coffee. I was like, well, then that's just a how much can you spend competition. And there's already one of those.
So
You're
right.
welcome to go in that. What if we can like bring all these other contraptions and devices and stuff? It's like you can do almost anything you want around the brewing, but you've got to be brewing on the AeroPress, all three elements of the AeroPress Classic, because this brewer, I think like unlike most other brewers, this brewer really lets you deliberately and conscientiously target particular variables and adjust them. Temperature, dose, brew time, agitation, extraction pressure, dilution, like all of these things you can do with an AeroPress deliberately and in a repeatable way. So the AeroPress for me is like a super, super versatile brewer where we're just on holiday in New Zealand. We're in the lift. One of my kids has got the AeroPress Championship hat on, and there's the couple in their 60s from Canada. They're like, oh, we love the AeroPress. 2 scoops. And I'm like, 2 scoops? That's the recipe. That's great.
That's so cool.
Then there's Jeff in Belgium who has like this like plastic PVC pipe that he rubs with cashmere, and he throws the coffee grinds through the pipe, and the static electricity pulls out the fines, and and that's cool as well, right? Like
Yeah.
that to me is like versatility on a whole new scale. For it all to boil down to, you've developed the skills to taste, to be considered. I think there's like an authenticity in that, to say, I've tasted the coffee. It does this if I do this, so I'm going to do this instead, and that is going to make it taste better in the cup. If more coffee shops just did that instead of like, oh, we got to buy the latest espresso machine, or
Yeah.
oh, that's because we don't have an auto tamper, or yeah, but if it was a geisha, it would taste better. All of these like peripheral things, I'll switch all of that out for somebody who's able to understand the variables, how they affect the cup, and then produce something for me that's like wonderfully drinkable. I'll take that, 7 days of the week.
I'm so glad you brought it to that point, which is that if more coffee shops would, if and there's not many competitions necessarily. There's maybe examples of events and things, but where you can say that skill set that is exhibited on the stage, if it was spread across to every shop, it would just unquestionably make what they have more effectively. They'd be more effective at their job. Coffee probably would taste better. They'd feel more pride in their craft. The customers would enjoy it more. They wouldn't
Mm,
feel the need to supplement with technological innovations when it seems like what you've done is you've pruned off any other option except for the energy to be diverted into innovating within a very narrow range, and it forces you to get a depth of understanding that you may have otherwise been robbed of if you're just
absolutely.
distracted.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. The amount of times we hear over the bar in other shops, or with new baristas that come and work with us in Fieldwork as well, like, oh, the coffee was tasting a bit bright, so I upped the dose, or things that to me are like the exact opposite. And it's like you're just grabbing things out of the air, you know.
Hmm.
And it reminds me, obviously, of me at
Yeah.
21. Close the door because we can't brew espresso with the door open or whatever. But my role is different now, where it's my responsibility, not to perpetuate that, but to help, you know, get that level of understanding in place, and nudge people back to where I think they've got a much better chance of producing good results. And yeah, working with the nuance of the coffee a little bit more.
I love it. Kind of a newfound enthusiasm for something that's nuanced, that is, yeah, just universally helpful. It's great. I really wish we had another full hour to
Yeah.
chat here. It goes too fast. But Tim, it's been wonderful to talk to you. And I think these insights are things that people really need to dwell on and ponder, because it does shape your philosophy on how you approach coffee. Is obviously something consequential to the way that you enjoy it and others enjoy it. So thank you so much. Where can we go to learn more about AeroPress Championships and Fieldwork Coffee, or just stay in touch with you?
Yeah, for both of the businesses, Instagram is probably the best place to hunt us down and keep tabs on us. AeroPress Championship, we're currently accepting hosting applications for the 2025 season, which is well and truly underway. I think we already have nearly 30 countries signed up. We had 65 countries and over 6,000 competitors in 2024, and an amazing world final in Lisbon. We have not announced the destination city for this year's world final just yet, but we are getting our 2024 champion, George, ready to send to Colombia with Cafe Imports. He's off to Willa to visit coffee producers there for a week, which, is just like one of the reasons you should practice those brewing skills and
Yeah,
go and make some great AeroPress coffee and win the championship. All that's available on our website, aero.press as well. And for Fieldwork, really Instagram is the best place to reach out if you happen to be in Melbourne. We have a couple of shops that you can come visit us at. And then we have wholesale customers across Australia and a few international as well. And if you like clean, sweet, fresh, washed coffees, we're a good place for you.
nice. Thank you, Tim. What a great
Thank you.
conversation.
My pleasure. My absolute pleasure. Thanks for taking the time.
All right, everybody. Well, I hope that you enjoyed the episode. It was definitely an enriching conversation, and it gives you perspective. I think that's one of the most important things. The idea that your opinions on coffee, and some of us who have been around long enough to have been had our edges rounded off by experience, and have a deeper appreciation, having kind of gone through and evolved as people, as the industry has evolved. We can tell you, like Tim, it's worth approaching coffee with humility. And when you find something good, focus on the celebration of it versus the conquering of it. I always joke around that today it feels like we're supposed to enjoy coffee in the technically correct way rather than just enjoying coffee. And what Tim has talked about in this episode is kind of the balance of those things to me. There's the focus on taste and excellence and in making sure that we're specializing in things that we do very, very well. But there's also the idea that we want to keep things focused on ways that we can make coffee accessible and make it fun, also make it something we celebrate and provide sustainably to people. So I'm thankful for Tim being on the show. So huge thank you. And if you're interested in the World AeroPress Championships, you can go to their website. It's just worldaeropresschampionship.com, or on Instagram, it's aero.press. And for Fieldwork Coffee, you can find them on Instagram. That is simply at Fieldwork Coffee. So again, huge thank you to Tim Williams. Really appreciate you and all you've done for coffee in the years you've been here. So if you have any questions or comments, feedback for me, go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com, and I'd be happy to hear it. Anybody who is a listener, reach out. I responded to a few emails this morning just from people who have general questions. Somebody had a career-based question. Other people have suggestions for topics, and some people are interested in coaching and consulting, and they reach out and I say, hey, let's chat. And we get to chat, and it's really fun. So if that's you, it's chris@keystotheshop.com. Don't forget, keyholder coaching groups are open. The applications are linked up in the show notes. So I hope to see your application get sent in. And with that, it is the end of our show. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.